So I talked to Hardy Nutritionals today, and they gave me the go-ahead to decrease my medication by 1/8. So I'm on 12 milligrams of trazodone and 150 milligrams of lithium. And recommended that I take lipospheric vitamin C, and it comes in a box of 30 1,000 milligram packets for $30. And so I'm going to try and order some of that on Amazon Prime, because they said that it actually really helps with any side effects for coming off medication, especially when it gets down to the lower doses. So after this reduction of medication, I only have one more, and then I will be off the medication. So this is the period of time they said it's good to have the liposomal vitamin C on hand, because it can help to mitigate any side effects when the body is realizing that it's no longer going to have access to this medication. So I will order that, and hopefully I will get it by Friday, so I'll have it on hand for these last 8 to 10 days of medication. And I'm feeling a bit anxious because I need somebody to order it for me on Amazon Prime, and they can't help me out right now, and I know it's getting down to the wire, and I really would like to have this on hand over the weekend if possible. And I slept pretty well. I think I'm not feeling as good today as the last few days though, for some reason. I feel really like I'm missing home today again, and I really don't know if I'm going to last another 2 months. That's a long time. And back to Joe Dispenza's Neuroscience Summit talk. He was talking about high frequency beta waves, and I wrote a note to myself that I think that those high frequency beta waves are actually words, and that's sort of the brain wavelength of cognition, which is just a bunch of words. So language is beta waves, and high beta waves is negative thoughts. And he said positive thoughts are mid to low beta range. So the beta in the prefrontal cortex is really the barrier between us being really in touch with reality. And when language goes away, there's energy because it's not blocked by the fast beta. And he said coherence consumes incoherence over time if superimposed. And the brain hyper-arouses itself with thought and tries to generate energy with thought, which is not based in reality. And this is instead of the energy generated by perception of reality. And most of us think of meditation as paying attention to the brain or paying attention to our thoughts and maybe trying to control our thoughts, when really it's actually the brain paying attention to the moment, and that doesn't necessarily require sitting down quietly. And Joe said something about getting people to believe how unlimited they are as part of what he does or something. And when we go into that state of mania, we definitely feel how unlimited we are. It's not just a belief, but it's an actual experience. But then the medical profession comes in and says, that's not true, and medicates it away. And I feel like the higher vibrations that we can access are limited by the high beta waves, or any of the beta waves. And that's the energy that goes offline when this other energy comes in and animates us. And he touched on gamma waves and how it was something about there's more waves and more light and more information. And gamma waves are 25 to 100 hertz, with it typically being around 40 hertz. And he said they may be implicated in creating the unity of conscious perception, the binding problem. And he talked about the formation of ideas, linguistic processing, which I think is what I've talked about related to language creation. And he also said there's various types of learning involved in gamma waves, and I've said this is a hyper-learning state when we go into map consciousness. And it's associated with bursts of insight, compassion, and high level of information processing and inspiration. And then it was interesting, I remember him saying, but I'm not going to go into that. And then he focused more on the beta waves and how to maybe meditate to change the beta waves, when I feel like if the gamma waves come in, they naturally deal with and put the beta waves in their right place. So it was interesting that he didn't want to go to that level. Maybe it's just time constraints, but I feel like a lot of what is out there that's supposed to be helpful is based on that level of cognition and beta waves and the me and all that. When if we had that gamma waves, that unity of conscious perception, maybe that would erase the other problems. But when we're operating from beta and trying to fix beta from beta, it's like a vicious loop that we can never get out of. And I think so-called mania and map consciousness is related to gamma, and it's just that our brains aren't used to operating with gamma waves. And those gamma waves come in and they're reorganizing the brain, and that could actually be the energy that's reorganizing and restructuring the brain in order for the brain to be able to operate with those frequencies. But they're sort of new frequencies that we're accessing. Again, it's seeing and walking in a different world. It could just be a matter of these gamma waves that could be everywhere, ever present, that our brains just don't really have the brain cells to access. It's like having a radio station that's not in the range of the radio dial. You wouldn't be able to access it. And I wonder if general semantics or English prime or E prime can help to release some of this beta energy block. The beta energy is blocking the gamma energy. And it's a way of speaking that avoids the verb to be. So instead of saying this is that, you say this seems to be that at this moment. So it's interesting to look it up, and I think it would help a little bit to utilize that to some extent. Because as soon as we say this is that, most of the time it no longer is that or never was that to begin with. But if we approach it with some apprehension and some tentativeness in our observations, then it's less something. So what is the intelligent use of language? Or how does intelligence use language? Are these gamma brain waves related more to intelligence, and what kind of language does that produce? Not just in words, but in actions. Does intelligence use language to create more language? And does intelligence only use language in the moment where necessary, related to the moment? And in this way, the brain is not being constantly activated in the domain of memory and using memory to interpret and translate the present moment. The brain becomes intelligent when it is quiet and only moves when necessary, only produces sound when necessary. Then one's compass is the subtle sounds and perceptions of the moment, of intelligence. And if there's silence in the brain and heart, what is the electromagnetic field? And there's no high beta to block the heart's energy and information from going up to the brain. And using thought to meet the moment, thought and emotion, creates the matter in the prefrontal cortex. But perception creates the brain as a fluid, liquid crystal. And even though perception and action, that movement of perception and action in the moment, puts us out of sync with society and with the people and the world, eventually we all sync back up. So there was this thing that they showed where they show metronomes out of sync, but eventually they all sync up and move in the same way. They're all going in different times like this, and then eventually they're all going at the same like this, even though they're made exactly the same way and have the same physical properties. There's something that moves these like objects into this syncing up and this coherence. So even if we go into this perception action state, high energy state, and are out of sync with society, eventually we all sync up, and that could be actually what brings us back down into the level of society and as it is right now. But they sync to us ever so slightly, just like we're sinking back down, back to the rate of vibration of that level. So each time we pop up and learn, and our brains go into that state, we're still causing a different synchronization, however small it may be. But the more that we can understand those states, not just go into them, but understand them and learn from them. Because I can't remember what interview I was listening to, but they were saying that human beings are designed to learn. That's our main thing. We're always learning, and we learn through our entire life. It's kind of like we're human learnings. So the more we go up and learn in that state, that can get passed on if we're learning something. If we go up to that state, we don't learn anything, then it doesn't really do very much. And I wrote down, when we feel we are missing something, when we go through life like that, we're actually missing something. We're missing the moment. And thought, in a way, is like internal marketing. It's how we pay with our energy, because that's what we pay attention to. We pay attention to our thought, and we pay attention with our thought. So there's this element that's paying some energy of attention to the thoughts in our head, and our thoughts in our head are what are directing our attention to some level out in the external. So it's kind of a double whammy. Desire is a movement away from the present moment as we feel like we are missing something, and what we are missing is the present moment. Let perception drive you. And gratitude is appreciation, and what we pay attention to appreciates, it grows. And so anything we pay attention to is what we're grateful for, whether it's good or bad, or whether we're actually saying that we're grateful, because we're actually appreciating that. We're always in gratitude. We're always appreciating something. And usually that's the thoughts in our head. We're growing that. And I've lately been paying more attention to what it is I will miss in California. The beauty, the peace, and allowing that to write on my brain instead of the things that maybe aren't feeling helpful for me right now. And in a way, perception is making note of things instead of desiring things. And people that live in poverty are often really happy, and that's because they don't have all these thoughts that are just marketing installed in their brain. A lot of our thoughts are around marketing and economy and buying and things and having, and this is what the conflict is a lot of times. So a lot of our thoughts are marketing. They're things that have been marketed to us, and we've bought them, even if we haven't yet bought them and we're thinking about them. Even education is part of this marketing, because we get educated so we can get stuff and buy into all these things that we're being sold. And if we think we're lacking something, we're right. It means we're lacking the present moment. In silence, waiting, in the unknown, there can be synchronicity, as one waits for the signal instead of chopping up the signals of the moment. None of our visual field is filled in by the brain, by pattern recognition. And I feel like a lot of this could be the beta wave chatter, but that beta wave chatter could be replaced with beauty, and then we're living in a completely different world. And I made a note of the term negative capability, and according to Wiki, it was a phrase first used by Roman poet John Keats in 1817 to characterize the capacity of the greatest writers, particularly Shakespeare, to pursue a vision of artistic beauty even when it leads them into intellectual confusion and uncertainty. as opposed to a preference for philosophical certainty over artistic beauty. The term has been used by poets and philosophers to describe the ability of the individual to perceive, think, and operate beyond any presupposition of a predetermined capacity of the human being. And to me, this sounds a lot like the territory that we enter when we go into map consciousness. And the term negative capability is further expanded on a website, keatsian.co.uk, and it says the concept of negative capability is the ability to contemplate the world without the desire to try and reconcile contradictory aspects or fit it into a closed and rational system. So in a way, this map consciousness could actually get the brain in touch with this negative capability. And there's a quote by Keats saying, "At once it struck me what quality went to form a man of achievement, especially in literature, and which Shakespeare possessed so enormously. I mean negative capability. That is when man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason." So it seems in a way the brain goes into this state of accessing its negative capabilities when in map consciousness. There's mysteries, there's doubts, we wonder, we're in awe, and the brain is in that state the whole time. And it's just these negative capabilities that the brain can have, but our brain and how we are raised sort of forces us into all these positive capabilities of rationality and reason. And later on the page it says, in this sense, negative capability is a sublime expression of supreme empathy. And empathy is the capacity for participating in, experiencing, and understanding another's feelings or ideas. It is a creative tool to help us understand each other, understand different points of view or different cultures, so that we might be able to express them. And I feel like going into map consciousness is just that, going into supreme empathy. And it could be actually the brain's need for it to understand each other. So normally how we operate with thought, we're in conflict with ourselves and other people. But when it goes into this empathy state, it's really learning and it's really trying to understand these relationships that we have and that we're in, that we're immersed in. And we feel ourselves as that relationship. We don't feel ourselves as we usually would in ego consciousness. And so this is from a website, Keats Kingdom. And I don't know much about Keats, but it's interesting that it's called a negative capability. And Krishnamurti often says that we need to approach things negatively. And maybe map consciousness is the brain approaching things negatively. Not I'm approaching things negatively, but the brain is actually in a negative state. And he might actually say that the brain needs to be in a negative state. So when we perceive based on light, we have all the information in our visual field, versus based on thought, which narrows our visual field down to a sound bite. And the brain works on abstraction and association, but it can transition into perception and action. And I wonder how I could design my life to live based on perception and action, and that empathy and embodied altruism. And really that would just be systematically getting rid of all the things that aren't that. I wouldn't actually be able to design it. It would only be editing other things out and allowing that energy to occupy that space. And that's kind of what happens in map consciousness and mania. It edits everything else out, and one is living a completely different life because the brain has negated all else in favor of being with the moment. Until next time. Let possibility act through you.